What's happening, guys? I hope you had a wonderful day today. I wanted to go over tonight, SOLY. Anybody that does follow on Twitter should be familiar with this one by now, obviously, given the move today. First and foremost, I wanted to go through a couple of the setups, a couple of the whys, and a couple of the, not necessarily the shoulda, coulda, woulda, but the why I took it off when I did at certain key levels, and had you not been able to see the right side of the chart, how that would have lined up, and also kind of hitting upon the videos that we have done in the prior couple days, as far as understanding that there's a lot of failed breakouts out there, understanding that it's not always going to be like this. This is very, very abnormal, right? Maybe 1% of the time it might do this, but 85-90% of the time these types of breakouts are going to fail, as you can see in this area right over here, like we've talked about many times recently. So once we go through that, I will go over the thought process and the game plan in the room, and sort of when I came to the conclusion, in my mind anyway, that this thing had a good chance to go to 17 to 22. And we kissed 22 after hours exactly, and it pulled back, which was phenomenal. But sort of the why, and have we seen this before, and kind of the game plan for tomorrow. So, SOLY. First and foremost, I got in very, very early. This is the power of surrounding yourself with people that are faster than you, better than you. I personally am not a really good news guy. Investors Underground has some of the best news, the fastest news that's out there on the street, and we beat a lot of the news wires. Typically, they come 3, 4, sometimes even 5 minutes later, compared to some of the stuff that we find. And this is a perfect example. TradeHawk, who is a phenomenal trader, phenomenal news guy, found the FDA approval relatively early, and the company did not put out a PR until about an hour and a half later. So not only did you have the first move, but you also had the other people that think, well, there's no company PR, it's not that big of a deal, so they've got the short thesis, and then you've got the company PR that comes out, and you've got that secondary squeeze. A couple things to think about here is a couple of the failed moves that I want to go over. So again, thinking about the last two videos that we had done, I talked about a lot about putting particular trades in categories, and how do they line up, and where do they fit. And a lot of times, all these types of breakouts, they fail. And some of the struggles that I've had, especially after a big breakout market, and I was talking about BPTH being maybe the peak of, or the start, but then the peak came maybe a month after or so, with all these stocks going nuts, to then the overstays and these breakouts turning into failed breakouts rather than continuation type plays. So I went over on the last YouTube video about the fact that 80 to 90% of the time these types of stocks are going to fail. And then you've got a move like this, which everybody gets excited, and then it brings back a lot of momentum within the momentum market. So in a situation like this, you've got this breakout move, pulls back, and a lot of times this will stuff, and then that's it. Trade's done, it's going to fade off, and it fails and continues to fizzle throughout the day. And you can see we talked a lot about like how you can use the left to predict the right, and where you're going to assume that it's going to fail, where you're going to assume that you're going to run into resistance. And if you assume that it's going to fail, then you're always going to have your size in check. That's one of the biggest things. A lot of times we end up oversizing, and like I told you guys, some of the struggles that I had after BPTH and SLNO and AKTX and ATOS and all those runners that we've had in the last couple months on their secondary runs, a lot of the trouble that I had was getting on the right side of the trade, but then they would run into their prior resistance, and rather than take it off right away and trade it maybe as well as I did on SOLY today, I'd still be in there, and then you get the slam candle. So you turn a big win into a potential either small win or a loser if you've sized in. So again, looking at this, you can see, and I'll even just draw a line to make it simple, but you can kind of see that you should assume that this level is going to fail because you've got a breakout here, fail, breakout, fail, breakout, fail a couple times. And it did. So then the company put out the PR in this area over here, consolidated, started to hold, and nice little ABCD type setup, gearing, perking, verse VWAP as your risk, and we break through that prior top. So you want to see it come back down and test, retest that level, that line, and it continues on from there. And then the next key level that I wanted to point out in the next same kind of situation is right over here. And again, it hits upon what we've been talking about on the recent videos. But if you just draw a line right across this level over here, try to make this straight, almost. You can see, and that's not the straightest line, but you can kind of see the same situation that I was talking about. So you should be assuming that this line is going to fail. On this breakout, you're going to assume that it's going to fail, assume it's going to fail, assume it's going to fail. That's going to keep you safe because in the end, usually you're going to have a nice slam candle. Now, this was a situation that I posted in the room, and I'm going to post some of the chat logs here today, but I want you guys to get familiar with them. But this was right before it happened. It was right around 1:21, and I was talking about how I just think that a lot of people were getting on the same side, meaning it was getting crowded. And so you can see here, thought process is that everybody is starting to play for the squeeze. And I think that people are too early to it. I think that shorts are definitely trapped, and I don't think they're going to get out, but I think that the long game is getting too crowded, and they're going to have to work people out before it goes higher. And that's exactly what happened. About a minute later, we got the flush out, and it came back down and consolidated towards VWAP level. So it retested the VWAP. But here's the key. The key is looking left to predict right. So now this was the prior top, prior top, prior top. We assume that this is going to fail. Then all of a sudden it swipes through. So if you anticipated it, sure, and you were buying dips, that's fine. And you probably had a little bit of an entry and you were letting the winner run. But just like we want VWAP to come back and retest, you want it to test the prior resistance and now become support. So you can see that this prior resistance now becomes support right here. And then dips from that point forward, you should assume that you're in go mode and potential squeeze. So this was obviously getting late in the day there, and the after hours move happened. So that was that. And you can see that it went to 22. Pretty amazing move. But just the thought process. Let's talk about the thought process behind the trade, and then we'll go over my trade. So for those of you guys that didn't see it earlier, you can see I was in here 613, 620s, 650s, and out 7.5, 8s. Restarted to buy 9s when I saw the parabolic, or the short kind of squeeze set up, and started to trade around basically from a 920 to 10 average to about 1350s on the exit, and pretty much traded exactly what I was saying, and assuming that it's going to fail each time at the top there. So with that said, why was I interested? What was it about this trade that got my interest, that made me think that there was a potential that this could happen? Well, first and foremost, they just had a hit piece out just a couple days ago. It was front ran a lot, it was pulled back, and then they put it out, and it definitely unwound nicely, and it was a big pullback day. But the stock had already come in. It was after they had some news. The prior Saturday, they had some type of conference or something like that. I forget. They were going to release some data. And so long story short, it ended up pulling back the next day. And then the next day it stayed heavy, and then they hit it. And so shorts were fresh. Shorts were, of the mindset that this thing is worthless. And they ended up getting absolutely smoked. And so knowing that, just like we talked about on Maxer, MAXR, when I did the last video review on the Sunday night scan last night, which obviously was actually Monday because we had Monday off. But just like that, I was familiar with the chart. I knew that this thing was loaded with shorts because the hit piece had just come out. And I knew that this was a recent IPO. I knew that there was only 2 million or so shares in the float, maybe a little bit more, a couple 100,000 more. And I also knew that there was that they had ran basically from 5 to 15. They had just come all the way back down to 5. And the biggest thing to me is I knew that there was about 10 million shares traded before 11 a.m., which is a hello type sign to me that says, hey, today is different. Today is different than every other day. This is abnormal volume. This is even if the price hadn't moved up to 9s or 10s at the time, something's different about today. There's a different price action. There's potentially algos involved. There's potentially shorts twisted. There's all these things that have come together and provided a large potential opportunity that allowed me to react that much quicker and know that, hey, if this thing holds on, even if I'm wrong, the risk is worth the reward. And that's what trading is all about. So I put that out there for those of you guys that follow on Twitter. You can see this, but I put out the facts. Highest volume since the IPO day. Could have been the trap of the century because we know that a hit piece just came out. They just absolutely trapped all of the people that follow them with a triple. So they got absolutely smoked. It's been straight down since the hit piece. And then the fact that it ramped up and it went from basically 6 to 750s to 850s to 9 relatively quickly attracts more shorts because you look at it and you're like, well, this was just 6 and now it's 9. It kind of just came up because of all the circuit halts. And on top of that, there was a newsletter involved. And a newsletter kind of went in and out, in and out, in and out, which 9 out of 10 times, for me, I have a rule. I have to sell. I have to sell into that because most of the time when newsletters come in, they mark the top because they shift the crowd. They shift the crowd from a short biased or a long, potentially not necessarily a heavily long bias type name, but they quickly shift everybody into a very, very long crowded situation. And the thing is when it hits a wall, so if it's going to potentially break out, if it doesn't move, if it meets a lot of inventory and the offer doesn't budge, then all of a sudden, guess what? It's coming right back. And you saw 2 of those candles. And those 2 candles were actually the newsletter exiting. So on top of that, it reminded me the closest thing that I've seen in recent months or years, it's been a while now, but LFIN, Elfin. Most of you guys will probably remember that. It was tracking for it to trade 10 times the float. Volume tells the story. And, the thought process is that, if you look back and you look at this move over here, you can see that the volume was about 15 million shares this first day. And the range was also about 7 to, I think, about 22 that day, or 20, I think it was 25 maybe. But it was very, very similar. Had a pre-market move that was basically 4 or 5 to 6, and then 7 to 20s basically during the day. Then the next day it gapped up and it just squeezed everybody out. So immediately my brain goes, where have I seen this before? And this is exactly what we've seen. And on top of that, LFIN was a recent IPO. It was only out for 3 days. This was the 4th day. So in my in my mind, this was actually probably less crowded than something like SOLY. And I'm not here trying to say that we're going to go to $150 like LFIN, but what I am saying is that we are in a situation that reminds me of LFIN. And that, as I mentioned, was very early. That was around 10 a.m., 10:50 a.m. or so, where I came to the conclusion, as I had tweeted, that I was thinking that there's potential for 17 to 22 on a move like this. And, to see that, you can see here around 10:59 a.m., 13 to 15 or higher, looking at the daily chart, looking at the volume. And then again, as I got more information and got a feel for it, you can see here setting up for 15 to 17 potentially. And then, I said 22 later in the week, but obviously we kissed it after hours. So really, really nice move. It's been a while since we've seen something like this. I do still think there's going to be some great plays. Unfortunately, I would have loved to see this open kind of flat and then do this out of the open tomorrow, because then we would have ran to, 30 or 35 or something. It doesn't mean that the play is over, but just for my conviction level, I would rather see shorts have been a little bit more confident and maybe add at the open tomorrow. And then do this type of move. But it is what it is. Had a huge move after hours, and it went right into the anticipated range, and a pretty phenomenal move. So on top of that, one thing before I forget is, I want you guys to see. Well, that was another point that I was making as well, and I'm just doing this on the fly, so I might be going around in a couple circles. But the thought or the goal was that somebody's still got an issue, right? They're trying to crack it midday, but it's not flushing. When it snaps like that, it should stay heavy, but it didn't stay heavy. And we've talked about what heavy means, and we've talked about what the heavy tape means. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back 2 videos, and you'll see that we went over how to tell when the tape is heavy. But the goal for me was 1160s, 1180s. Ideally, they churn it around there and really set another trap shorts for the move later on. And this is not a one-day situation in my opinion. And then when they try to crack it and they can't, you have to take note. VWAP never failed. It got a little bit long crowded, as I had mentioned. So the only way to really get that out is to flush everybody out. Flush all the longs out there, but still be there and support it. So that's the idea here, is when they can't crack it, you need to take note. Well, if they can't crack it, that means that after that flush, they were supporting it. They were buying it. They were there. And on top of that flush, that also makes it look like it's weak. It makes it look like, hey, maybe it's finally breaking down. It's time to add short. And then, bam, they ramp it right back up, right over here. And so everybody that had maybe leaned into this anticipating a VWAP fail is now bent and went straight back up to pretty much the trend in the area that they were trapped in before. So that's the thought process there. Again, I'm going to go ahead and post the chat logs today. A really, really nice move in the room. Just being on the right side. I saw a lot of people trying to find the top and shorting, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, and all this kind of stuff. You're basically playing with fire. You start to short a little bit here and you cover, you short here, you cover, you short here, you cover, and all of a sudden you're bent, $5 a share. It's not a smart way to trade this type of name, especially on the front side of a move. We can be we can be the best traders we are. We can exhibit fantastic risk management, but it's that one time that it gets away because we're trying to find the top that you end up getting hammered. So just be cautious of that kind of stuff, and we'll see what happens tomorrow, the next couple days. But I just wanted to go over this, and also I will have an accompanying blog post so you can kind of see about how we go about it in the room, and the thought process, the feedback, and that's about it, guys. So if you have any questions, again, I would encourage you to reach out and ask any questions. As you can see, fast reaction to the original news. VWAP hold, consolidate hold after it slams. Consolidation in this range. So this was one of the other points too. We don't know what's going to happen, right? We don't know at this point what's going to happen the rest of the day. So the most important thing here is that 80 to 90% of the time, there's a good chance this type of move is going to fail. And it did. It failed. So when you look back, I did everything proper. I was selling into the ramps. I did the proper thing. I traded, and I was traded well, and I was rewarded for it. And it gave me the ability to go ahead and add back later on if I wanted to, because we don't know that this is just going to consolidate and then rip back up. This is rare. This is very, very rare. And the 5, 10, and maybe in a situation like this, the 1% of the time that these do have these types of legs, at least you're going to be in the right mindset to continue to trade it versus exhausting yourself on the front side of the move. So many times, for example, on AMD. AMD is a perfect example of a name that I've just exhausted myself so many times on the front side of the move that I end up missing that really, really big unwind. So an example of that is if you go back, and I did trade AMD a little bit today, but if you go back over here, I was trading this every single day. And I exhausted myself to the point where I ended up missing these multi-dollar pullback days, the $3 down, $4 down, things like that, because I was so focused on trying to find the top, find the top, and to the point where I was exhausted. So that's the point that I'm making here, is that you need to trade and respect the trend rather than trying to always force the trade or over trade it, because you're going to end up exhausting yourself to the point where you're like, you know what, screw it, it's coming off radar, and then it does exactly what you thought the entire time. So anyway, questions, reach out, comment section below. Like I said, I'm going to have an accompanying blog, so if you just watch the video, just make sure that you check out the blog as well. We'll have a link in there. And we hope to see you in the chat room. I think that if you do review some of this stuff, you're going to start to see just how much you can get out of being in the room. So again, have a great night, guys, and I hope you enjoy the video.